Southern California in the late 1970s. Palm trees swaying, golden sunsets over the Pacific, freeways buzzing with life. To many it was a land of opportunity, youth, and freedom. But beneath the sunshine, two men were plotting a nightmare that would leave scars on the state's history forever. They weren't the kind of monsters who lurked in the shadows of horror movies. They looked ordinary. A factory worker, a drifter. Two men who might sit beside you in a diner or walk past you at the gas station. But when they came together, something truly horrifying was unleashed. Their names were Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. Together they became known as the Toolbox Killers, a duo who kidnapped, tortured, and murdered teenage girls with unimaginable cruelty. And the evidence they left behind? A single audio tape of one victim's final moments would become one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in criminal history. This is the story of the Toolbox Killers. Two Paths of Darkness. Lawrence Bittaker. Born in 1940 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Lawrence Sigmund Bittaker's life began in instability. His biological mother placed him in an orphanage, and he was later adopted by a couple who moved frequently because of his adoptive father's work in the aviation industry. Bittaker never felt rooted anywhere. He struggled in school, showing signs of high intelligence but also antisocial behavior. By his mid-teens, he had already dropped out and turned to crime. Shoplifting, car theft, and later more serious offenses landed him in juvenile detention. Prison would become a revolving door for Bittaker. Every time he got out, he committed new crimes: robbery, assault, theft, always ending up back behind bars. By the 1970s, he was a career criminal with a long rap sheet. But what few realized was that his fantasies were far darker than his record revealed. Roy Norris. Roy Lewis Norris, born in 1948 in Greeley, Colorado, also endured a troubled upbringing. His family life was abusive and unstable, marked by neglect and trauma. Norris claimed he was sexually abused as a child, experiences that twisted his view of relationships and sexuality. Unlike Bittaker, Norris's criminal history leaned heavily into sexual violence. He was arrested for attempted rape, indecent exposure, and sexual assaults throughout his teens and 20s. Like Bittaker, he spent much of his adult life in prison. The paths of Bittaker and Norris crossed in 1978 at the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. Both men were serving time. Bittaker for theft, Norris for sexual assault. In prison, men often bond over shared stories, plans, or survival tactics. But what united these two was far more sinister. They discovered they shared sadistic fantasies, specifically the abduction, rape, and torture of young teenage girls. Prison psychologists would later say their pairing was like a match and gasoline, individually dangerous, but together, explosive. Instead of discouraging each other, they fed one another's darkest urges. They fantasized about building a van that could serve as a mobile torture chamber. They talked about the tools they would use, and most horrifyingly, they made a pact. Once they were released, they would carry out their fantasies together. In 1979, both men were paroled. Their deal was set in motion. Shortly after his release, Lawrence Bittaker purchased a silver 1977 GMC cargo van. To the average eye, it was just another work van, but to Bittaker and Norris, it became their weapon of choice. They nicknamed it Murder Mac. Inside, they customized it to fit their gruesome plans. The van had no windows in the back, only sliding doors. They stocked it with tools: pliers, screwdrivers, ice picks, sledgehammers, duct tape, rope, and handcuffs. These were ordinary items found in any toolbox, but in their hands, they became instruments of terror. The plan was simple and chilling: drive around, spot a teenage girl walking alone, lure her into the van, and then carry out their sadistic fantasies. Over the next 5 months, they would turn this plan into reality. Between June and October of 1979, the Toolbox Killers claimed the lives of 5 teenage girls. Lucinda Lynn Schaefer, 16. On June 24, 1979, Lucinda Schaefer was walking home from a church meeting in Redondo Beach. Bittaker and Norris spotted her. They pulled over and tried to lure her in by offering marijuana and a ride. She refused. But they didn't give up. After driving ahead, they parked and waited. When Lucinda walked past, Norris grabbed her and dragged her into the van. Lucinda fought back fiercely, but once inside she was overpowered. For hours the men assaulted her. When they decided to kill her, they faced a chilling dilemma. They didn't want blood in the van. So they strangled her with a wire hanger tightened with pliers, a method they would use again. Her body was later thrown into the wilderness, never to be recovered. Andrea Joy Hall, 18. On July 8, Andrea Hall was hitchhiking near the Pacific Coast Highway. She accepted a ride from Bittaker and Norris. Inside the van, the nightmare repeated. Andrea was bound, gagged, and assaulted. Unlike Lucinda, the killers documented Andrea with photographs. They forced her into poses, capturing their cruelty on film. Andrea was later killed in the same methodical manner, strangulation with tools from their toolbox. Jackie Gilliam, 15, and Jacqueline Lamp, 13. On September 3, two friends, Jackie and Jacqueline, were sitting at a bus stop when Bittaker and Norris offered them a ride. The girls were cautious, but eventually they accepted. Once inside the van, Norris pulled out a knife. The girls were tied up and gagged. This abduction lasted longer than the others. For nearly 2 days, the killers tortured both girls, using their tools to inflict unimaginable suffering. Finally, they murdered them, one with strangulation, the other beaten with a sledgehammer. Their bodies, too, vanished into the remote wilderness. Shirley Lynette Ledford, 16. Halloween night, October 31, 1979. 16-year-old Shirley Ledford had been at a party and was looking for a ride home. When Bittaker and Norris pulled up in Murder Mac, she climbed in, likely thinking it was safer than hitchhiking with strangers. What followed was the most infamous crime of the Toolbox Killers. This time, they decided to record the ordeal on cassette tape. For over an hour, Shirley was tortured, beaten, and humiliated while the tape rolled. The recording captures her screams, her pleas for mercy, and the men's mocking laughter. Finally, she was strangled with a wire hanger and bludgeoned with a sledgehammer. Unlike the other victims, her body was dumped on a random lawn in Sunland, California, a deliberate act meant to shock the community. When investigators later discovered the cassette tape, it became one of the most horrifying pieces of evidence in criminal history. Veteran detectives and prosecutors who listened to it described it as unbearable. Some had to leave the room. Jurors who heard it in court were traumatized. The tape was never released publicly due to its graphic nature, but transcripts revealed the cruelty, Shirley begging for it to stop, the killers egging each other on, and the cold, mechanical nature of their sadism. Even hardened criminals in prison reportedly refused to be in the same room when the tape was played. For months, the Toolbox Killers believed they were untouchable, but in November 1979, their luck ran out. Norris, who had been bragging to an acquaintance about the murders, confided too much. The acquaintance went to police, who began an investigation. Soon, both men were arrested. A search of Bittaker's home and van uncovered photographs of victims, the infamous tape, and tools matching the survivors' descriptions. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, Norris agreed to cooperate in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He confessed in chilling detail, describing each murder and implicating Bittaker as the ringleader. In 1981, Lawrence Bittaker went on trial. The evidence was damning: survivor testimony, Norris's confession, photographs, and the tape. The jury didn't take long. Bittaker was convicted of multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. He was sentenced to death. Roy Norris, who testified against Bittaker, was sentenced to 45 years to life. Bittaker spent decades on death row at San Quentin State Prison. He showed little remorse, often downplaying his crimes. In 2019, he died of natural causes, never facing execution. Roy Norris remained imprisoned until his death in 2020. He occasionally expressed regret, but for many his words meant little compared to the suffering he caused. The Toolbox Killers' crimes left a permanent scar on California's history. They demonstrated how two seemingly ordinary men could feed off each other's darkness, escalating their fantasies into reality. Their case also highlighted how vulnerable young runaways and hitchhikers were during the 1970s. Law enforcement became more aware of the dangers posed by predators hunting for opportunity. Most haunting of all is the tape of Shirley Ledford. Though sealed away, its mere existence continues to horrify those who study the case. It stands as chilling proof of human cruelty and the suffering endured by a young girl whose life was stolen. The story of the Toolbox Killers forces us to ask difficult questions. How could society overlook the warning signs in two men with long criminal histories? What makes some people escalate from fantasy to action? And most chillingly, how many more predators might still be out there, blending into ordinary life, waiting for their chance? Bittaker and Norris may be gone, but the legacy of their crimes remains. For the families of their victims, for the jurors who heard the tape, and for anyone who has studied the case, the horror is unforgettable. The Toolbox Killers remind us of a truth we'd rather ignore. Sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under our beds. They're driving down our streets, smiling at strangers, planning their next move in plain sight.